Hi, I'm Nate Seberg, and this is One Day Ahead. Welcome to Of Mice and Men, Chapter 1. If you're a teacher, check out onedayahead.com, where you will find all of this series, videos about teaching it, and a full teaching unit. Finally, this is not a spoiler-free video, fair warning. But if you're good to go, then pet your dead mouse and pass me the ketchup as we dive into Of Mice and Men, Chapter 1. So this little fella is Of Mice and Men. It is one of the most taught books in school ever. Why? Well, it's a towering achievement of literature. Fine. It incisively explores and illuminates the human condition. Not totally sure what that means, but okay. It has interesting characters making choices that matter, sure. But listen, you want the truth? I will level with you. Why does every high school kid get assigned this book? It's because it's short, everyone. 107 pages. Kids do this all day. I gotta keep it snappy. And this book isn't even a book. I don't know who gets to make these decisions, but apparently it's a novel. We make the word longer and the book shorter. Anyway, if this is a novel and this is like a haiku, then a novella is gonna be like, right. So my guy Steinbeck didn't write a full novel, and he also apparently didn't like chapters. Seriously, he did not put chapter numbers in his books. It seems both pretentious and difficult to discuss on the internet. Anyway, there are 6 chapters, but you're going to need to write them in yourself. Go ahead and do it. Steinbeck's dead. He won't care. So this book is impressive. It is lean, it is brutal, it is sad, and it's controversial. There is nothing here that doesn't matter. No character we don't need. Also, there is only one plot in this. We only have the A plot. We don't ever head off on some B plot, other character side quest. Hello, traveler. I've lost my chickens. If you find them, meet me by the old mill and I'll give you a reward. Ugh. That was dumb. Listen, if you didn't get that joke, don't worry about it. The problem's not with you, it's with me. So no, in this book, we are only ever with our main characters and we are only ever doing one thing. And that one thing is murder. Maybe. It's actually maybe not, you'll see. So we open on a spot in Central California along the Salinas. We gotta look it up. Salinas. Okay, here we go.
Salinas River.
Salinas River. So we open on a spot in Central California along the Salinas River. It's an idyllic location specifically, but a crap time generally because we are in the heart of the Great Depression. You've heard of it. The economy has shattered and sky-high unemployment has forced millions into the itinerant workforce. Men like our 2 main characters, they are George and Lenny. George is the brains of this outfit. He is small and quick, dark of face with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Lenny is his opposite. He is a giant man, shapeless of face, with large, pale eyes, with wide, sloping shoulders, and he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. So I want you to pay attention to all the times Steinbeck refers to Lenny in animalistic terms. First, it's a bear with paws. 32 words later, he's getting a drink and snorting up the water like a horse. This will keep up throughout, and I point this out here because these animal references are going to matter at the end. I know that sounds crazy, but go with me. We quickly learn that Lenny has some sort of intellectual disability. He has trouble with memory and reasoning and is 100% dependent on George. Lenny is a child. He is a giant, water-snorting adult child. So the men are traveling to a job on a ranch. Their work tickets in their pockets will land them food, shelter, and pay in exchange for bucking bales of barley and other hard labor. We also learned that they just left a job in the town of Weed, that's 6 hours north, and that the job ended badly. They were run out of town by a lynch mob, but Lenny cannot remember why. As they sit by the river talking, Lenny plays with something in his pocket, and George demands to see it. I ain't got nothing, George, honest. Come on, give it here. Lenny held his closed hand away from George's direction. So their dynamic is reminiscent of an overstressed parent and a slightly bewildered toddler. Anyway, Lenny's fidget spinner turns out to be what you'd suspect. It's a dead mouse, which he loves petting. Classic Lenny. Give it here, said George. Leave me have it, George. Give it here. Lenny's closed hand slowly obeyed. George took the mouse and threw it across the pool to the other side, among the brush. So through this little episode, we learned something else that will come up later. Lenny is preoccupied with soft things. The men are close to the site of their job placement, but they decide to camp here instead of pushing on. This is a clever ruse by George. I love a good ruse, because if they turn up after the work crews have left tomorrow morning, they squeeze out an extra day of leisure. So they lay back on the sand, and George sets in on Lenny, and it's a familiar refrain. "God, you're a lot of trouble," said George. "I could get along so easy and so nice if I didn't have you on my tail. I could live so easy and maybe have a girl." So the first time you read it, this seems dickish, and that's certainly there. My students are always like, maybe I don't like this mouse-stealing a-hole. I mean, he's literally berating an intellectually disabled man, and I get that. You are not wrong. However, in time, we will see that this conversation is something like a routine between them. They have had it many times, and it serves a purpose. And we are also going to see that everyone in this book is terrible. With a few exceptions, the people are all cruel, hard, and looking out exclusively for themselves. I get that I'm moving the goalposts on you here. I'm saying George is better by comparison, but it is true. The fact that George doesn't leave Lenny when everyone else is awful reframes him as a good man doing just a crap job. So George sends Lenny off to fetch some firewood. When Lenny comes back, his feet are wet. George takes a look, rolls his eyes, and demands that he hand over the mouse again. Lenny reluctantly reached into his pocket. His voice broke a little. "I don't know why I can't keep it. It ain't nobody's mouse. I didn't steal it. I found it lying right beside the road." George's hand remained outstretched imperiously. Slowly, like a terrier who doesn't want to bring a ball back to its master, Lenny approached, drew back, approached again. George snapped his fingers sharply, and at the sound, Lenny laid the mouse in his hand. Lenny breaks down near tears at losing his mouse. George heard Lenny's whimpering cry and wheeled about, blubbering like a baby. "Jesus Christ, a big guy like you!" Lenny's lip quivered, and tears started in his eyes. "Ah, Lenny," George put his hand on Lenny's shoulder. "I ain't taking it away just for meanness. That mouse ain't fresh, Lenny. And besides, you broke it petting it. You get another mouse that's fresh, and I'll let you keep it a little while." Lenny continues. "They was so little," he said apologetically. "I'd pet 'em, and pretty soon they'd bit my fingers, and I'd pinch their heads a little, and then they was dead, because they was so little." Because they were so little. Or, bear with me, because you literally crushed their heads. You know, it's potato, mashed potato. So they build a fire. George opens a can of beans, and they talk about the future. And this part, friends, is important. If George complaining about Lenny is their routine, this is their ritual. This is the unique thing they share. It's part prayer, part promise, and part bedtime story. It's singular, it's pure, and the story will kindle hope in all who hear it. George paints a picture of the future they will one day share. It's of a ranch that they will own one day with a little house and animals. They will have an easy life, working only for themselves. When it rains, they will relax by the fire. When friends come by, they will stay the night. The hurt will be gone. The work will be easy, and the men will finally and fully belong. Then we come to Lenny's favorite part. "Tell me, like you done before." "Tell you what? About the rabbits, please, George? Like you done before?" George's voice became deeper. He repeated his words rhythmically, as though he had said them many times before. "Guys like us that work on ranches, we're the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family. They don't belong no place. They ain't got nothing to look ahead to." Lenny was delighted. That's it. Now tell how it is with us." George went on. "With us, it ain't like that. We got a future. We got someone to talk to that gives a damn about us. If them other guys get in jail, they can rot for all anyone gives a damn, but not us." Lenny broke in. "But not us. And why? Because I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you, and that's why." And he laughed delightedly. George goes on. "Someday we're gonna have a little house and a couple acres and a cow and some pigs and live off the fat of the land," Lenny shouted, "and have rabbits." The chapter winds down, and the men move towards sleep. But before dropping off, George decides to hedge his bets. He asks Lenny to look around and try to remember this place. He says if the next work site leads to the same trouble as last time, Lenny should come back here to hide. You know, just in case. So this is Chekhov's Riverbank. The men slip off to sleep, and that's chapter 1. So if we want to understand this book, we've got to dig deeper than just plot. Let's do a little analysis. So Mice and Men hinges completely on this relationship. George and Lenny, their bond is its virtue and ultimately its tragedy. And that's where I want your attention as we encounter this book, because it's a nuanced thing. In this chapter, the men swing wildly between extremes of anger, frustration, even manipulation, all the way to tenderness, care, camaraderie, and a shared hope for the future. But what isn't obvious in this chapter is that the depth of this relationship, scratch that, the bare existence of this relationship built on mutual care where I have you and you have me is unique in this book. And I mean that literally. This relationship, these two men, is the only one that exists in this book. Everyone else we meet will prove to be distrustful, mean-spirited, possessive, selfish, or otherwise not awesome. Even the nice characters, Slim for example, are decent humans, but they don't have this. They don't have love. Which brings me to George. Because you could be like, what are you talking about, Nate? George calls Lenny a blubbering baby and he curses at him constantly. He says explicitly that his life would be way better without him. Reading this with 21st century eyes, it would be easy to judge George. This guy is berating Lenny for his obvious disabilities. And that's true, like it just is. But as the book continues on, we will see that even this berating, this talk of how much better life would be, even this is a ritual between them. And Lenny knows his part too. When he threatens to go off in the hills there and find a cave, he's playing his part. But even though these conversations can seem jarring, it's really just talk. Ultimately, they do stay together. George doesn't leave and Lenny doesn't go spelunking. George cares for his friend even at the cost of his freedom, his whiskey, and his cat houses. And that fact speaks to George's character louder than any of his stressed out profanity ever will. Next up, something interesting that might not be too obvious is just how these two guys landed this job. So it's the Great Depression. Millions are living in poverty, you got that. To survive, men like George and Lenny are forced out onto the road looking for itinerant, temporary work. On page 6 we get, you remember sitting in that gutter on Howard Street and watching that blackboard? Lenny's face broke into a delighted smile. Why sure, George, I remember that. You remember about us going into Murray and Reddy's and they give us work cards and bus tickets? Murray and Reddy was a job agency based in San Francisco, and it was a real place. They served as a middleman connecting unemployed workers with employers. They made a profit by vetting workers and connecting them to jobs based on skills, temperament, etc. And job agencies get paid going both directions. The workers pay a fee for a job lead, and the employers pay to list with the agency. The thing is, this setup where they had nearly a bottomless supply of desperate workers was ripe for exploitation. Agencies were often called job sharks because they ran a bit of a racket. Here's the ruse, and you know I love a good ruse. Unemployed, agency, employer. Got it? So the employer could get a cheaper listing rate from the agency if they agreed to only take workers that go through this one outfit. That's why Lenny and George have to have work cards in their pocket. That card proves that they went through the contracted agency and paid their fee. You can't just turn up and work, you have to pay for that card. And the calculus for the worker is simple. Like, I'll pay that small fee for the card because I'm guaranteed a job and I'll make that money back the first month I work. But here's the cheat. A few weeks later, the agency goes to the employer on the sly and says, like, listen, I'll pay you some amount of money if you just fire everybody. Like, this is manual labor. It's not like there's a learning curve here. So the employer sees a chance to get paid, and the shark can now cycle a whole new crop of workers through their system. For all we know, this is exactly the sort of racket George and Lenny are caught up in. A cycle fueled by greed and enabled by the desperation of the Great Depression. Which sucks. And that is Of Mice and Men, Chapter 1. Thank you for watching. Next episode, we head to Chapter 2, where Candy carries a broom, a blind dog wanders around, and Curly can't find his wife. All that and more next time on One Day Ahead.